Great, thanks so much, Sue. So as Sue mentioned, my presentation this morning is titled Business Unusual, Strategies to Ensure 2018 is the Year Research Stops Dreaming and Starts Doing. So as I just mentioned, my presentation is about really how to kickstart 2018, how to make it different and better than it was in 2017. And as an advisor to more than a dozen firms in the marketing insight space, one of the biggest challenges I find that business owners have is spending too much time working in the business, focusing on the day-to-day versus on the business. And it's hard to do, to give yourself the time for big picture thinking when you're enmeshed in running and growing your business day-to-day. And that's why I think this idea of business unusual is really imperative to embrace in 2018. I believe that as an industry, we're really suffering from a lack of understanding of how to fundamentally evolve our methods and focus on the activities that are going to drive long-term success and value for our industry. So there's a quote from the Quarks Corporate Researcher report that I wanted to share with you because I feel like there's a lot of frustration in the industry right now about clients feeling like there's a lack of innovation going on, and certainly suppliers feeling like, gosh, I'm just not innovating fast enough. And this quote really resonated with me. I'm tired of hearing that the market research industry needs to innovate. What does that even mean anymore? Has anyone in the MR world done truly innovative work lately? And I can certainly understand that frustration because I think over the years, I don't know that market research has really evolved that much. And I'm not going to run through the entire history of market research, but if you look at this timeline here, since the 1920s, companies have been investing in understanding the underlying reasons for what drives people to buy, with folks like Ernest Stichter and Daniel Stark pioneering focus groups and the power of word-of-mouth persuasion. George Gallup, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, began surveying national audiences to see which ads were more memorable, and his efforts soon became recognized industry-wide as an integral part of market growth. Now, these qualitative and quantitative forms of exploration really are the makeup of modern-day market research. And I think market research has since become a common practice in every industry and has only grown in importance. But with new technologies and an ever-changing precarious economy, the future of market research is one of paramount importance to understanding the nuances of a consumer-driven economy. Why then do we continuously, as an industry, rely on outdated and safe modes of research? Since the 1920s, our data collection platforms have evolved, but the methods, not so much. Surveys and quick polls from Gallup's early days of mail-in responses still seem to be the persistent method of knowing the hearts and minds of our consumers. And most of the online surveys I see today are the same phone surveys I was conducting in the early 1990s. It really just slapped online. And I'm going to show you a few examples of these in just a minute. And I don't want to sound alarmist or negative about the industry because I think there's a lot of untapped opportunity here, but I do believe that if we keep going down the same track we've been on, that we're really on the precipice of a market research apocalypse. And here's why. The first thing I wanted to show you was this image from the SMR GMR. And although the research industry reported growth this year, and according to SMR, that was 2.3% globally, in truth, revenue is actually down nearly 4% in 2 years from what we have historically defined as market research. And I say that again, what we have historically defined. And you can see this in the data from the GMR. 28.6% of growth is coming from social media monitoring. That literally didn't exist 10 years ago. And nearly 10% of industry growth came from web traffic measurement. Again, this is a method not defined as traditional market research. So most of the growth that we're seeing is actually coming from outside of that traditional market research definition. So what's the landscape of research today? Only a few years ago, I met with a global head of operations for one of the top 3 largest global research firms, and she disclosed that they were still conducting nearly 60% of their global data collection face-to-face. And I know a lot of folks are critical still of face-to-face methods, particularly at the advent of the internet and faster, easier ways of getting in touch with people, but I really don't think it's much better online. And this is some data from SSI that unfortunately I only have through 2015, but you can see here that despite all the industry talk and the focus on the importance of decreasing survey length and the focus on new technologies that demand it, average length has actually increased over the last 5 years. So from my perspective, that's not a technology issue, that's a methods and design issue. I think the situation is even direr for mobile surveys. Last year, I completed at least a dozen surveys for mobile experiences that weren't mobile optimized. For instance, my bank in the States is Bank of America, yet when they sent me a survey about my mobile banking experiences, the survey wasn't mobile optimized. And it was kind of an interesting time for me to take that survey because I actually met a guy in an insights role for Bank of America at an event a few months later. And when I mentioned the survey issue to him, he sheepishly sort of said that he was aware of the issue, but that the research supplier had handled the survey design. I'm not really sure why mobile optimized design is so confounding for researchers, because I run into this issue over and over again, or why we aren't taking the time to take our own surveys. You would think that would be kind of step one in terms of survey design. And if you think this isn't an issue that respondents notice, think again. Although I can't show video during this webinar, if you visit this URL from my friends at Voxpopme, you'll see exactly what respondents think about poorly designed research surveys. The truth of the matter is that as an industry, we're just not evolving in the right ways. Although we're adopting new technologies, albeit slowly, I think, our methods aren't evolving much, and that leaves a big gap in the insights we're developing. So you might think, why change? What's the rush? Why is there so much urgency around it? Well, I think I have a pretty good one. IBM's Watson has so comprehensively mastered bankruptcy law that a major New York law firm last year laid off 50 top bankruptcy lawyers. Of course, workers in manufacturing have known about this for years. The U.S. automotive sector is booming, but with far fewer workers than it was when it was on the verge of collapse in 2009. And I think as much as we wish it weren't so, automation just does decrease the demand for labor. Steve Phillips of Zappy has argued that automation in the market research space will free up time for researchers to be more creative and intellectually productive. And I agree with that. But I also think the likely result is that it will diminish the need for researchers overall. And those that do remain will be the ones whose intellectual prowess guarantees them higher status and compensation than their peers. These are the researchers that aren't so worried about data collection or other functions that are easily automated, but those focused on actually delivering insights. And that's where I see the most opportunity for the future of the industry. So let's spend some time talking about opportunities. And I think I bring a unique perspective to what I see as the biggest opportunities for researchers. Although I've spent over 20 years of my career in the insight space, in truth, I more or less left the industry when I sold my last firm, Decipher, at the end of 2014 and made a hard pivot into growth strategy consulting. Having started, scaled, and sold multiple firms in the insight space, I realized that it wasn't the starting up I loved so much. It was really tackling all the barriers to growth, which can be substantial, if you're a founder. And how I scaled my firms wasn't specific to insights companies. The tricks I used apply to any type of company, and I'm going to share with you what I look for in firms with high growth potential, which also applies to the industry as a whole. And also I want to share with you how you can create a culture of innovation and experimentation while combating risk and the fear of failure, which is a big thing for a lot of people. So what do I look for? There's 4 key attributes I look for whenever I'm evaluating a company or a new product for long-term sustainable growth. The first is grit. How much intestinal fortitude do you have for your new product or method? Are you passionate about it? Do you feel without a doubt that it can be a success? That's been the defining factor, I think, in all of my companies, is that I was just blindly confident that they would be successful. I really believed in them. And that's a question, you have to ask yourself anytime you launch a new product or service or a company, can you dig in and keep working when success isn't instantaneous? Grit to me is all about staying power and making sure that what you build is built to last. So grit's really important. Don't underestimate the importance of it. The second is whether what you're developing, and this goes for companies and new methods, is scalable. Can it work at large scale? The third is future-proof. Future-proofing your company, product, or service can be really challenging. I'm sure you all remember when Google Glass first hit the market, and with that came a research firm whose entire business was based on using Google Glass for data collection. And when Google Glass failed to reach critical mass, so did that firm. So make sure whatever you're focused on can really iterate around different technology changes. And lastly is an ability to pivot. And this is kind of a segue into a conversation about fear of failure, which I think is real for a lot of us, myself included. Loss aversion can make it difficult for us to know when to pivot. for instance, investing in the stock market, or people who are professional poker players. You know, most of those folks are pretty loss averse. And we hate admitting when we're losing, and so we just try to power through it, particularly when it's a public failure or a career-damaging failure. And this happened to me in my second startup when I experienced a number of setbacks that were so significant they almost put the company under in its first year. And knowing when to pivot and try something new is really important. And I think it also really helps to try to take the emotion out of the situation. And when I think of failure and the ability to pivot, I think about the great choreographer Twyla Tharp, who worked with Billy Joel. And if you're in your 40s like me, you might remember this musical that Twyla Tharp and Billy Joel produced called Moving Out. It's about 10 years ago. And this musical was horrible when it launched. It received horrible reviews. But rather than receiving those reviews and curling up into the fetal position and saying, oh gosh, everyone hates it, instead Twyla Tharp said, okay, I'm going to fix it. And she went through all the reviews and she made a spreadsheet of all the complaints and then went through like a checklist and fixed them one by one. And in just a few weeks, the show was enormously better and went on to run for years, and it actually won 2 Tony Awards. And critics couldn't believe it. She really approached the issue like an engineering problem, and that's why I love that story of Twyla Tharp so much. And when she did that, that's when she stopped the process of failing and started the process of fixing everything. So I want to talk a little bit about that fear of failure and how to combat it, because it's real and it can be really paralyzing. 75% of venture-backed startups fail, so I totally understand why there's fearfulness around change or trying something new. The idea really is to reduce risk and optimize return. And I look to Unilever as an example of successful innovation with their Unilever Foundry and Unilever Ventures. But what about all the failed attempts at innovation that Unilever's experienced? Unilever actually had to undergo 449 failures to achieve a single success with their Foundry, which I think not a lot of people are aware of. And I think what this tells us is that while they might have developed just one innovation, their appetite for innovation is really incredible. What's market research's failure to success ratio? What's our appetite to innovate? I think it's something we really have to ask ourselves as an industry. The second thing that I've learned to really combat a fear of failure is to use clients as advocates. And at my first startup, OTX, we were looking to take movie studio research online and unseat NRG, who at the time was really the only research firm conducting film research. And this was no small task. NRG actively worked to combat our methods and even sent letters to every studio head warning them of the dangers of adopting online research methods. But rather than try to convince every insights department in every studio, we decided we were just going to focus on one, Warner Brothers and their head of research, Dan Rosen. Now, Dan believed in what we were doing, and he wanted to be at the forefront of revolutionizing studio research. So we worked together for over a year to test every single trailer and TV spot he had, and we built a normative database that we then used as a benchmark for all of the other studios. And it also allowed us to build the first online box office tracking product, which predicted box office before opening weekend. First online box office tracking product. And because of Dan's support, OTX was ranked the fastest growing research firm in the world in 2002 and 2003. So don't disregard the importance of using client advocates. And lastly, using lean startup techniques. Loss aversion, as I mentioned earlier, it's real and it's not uncommon to have it when you're competing in a space where you don't have the ability to try things over and over again very easily. But that's not generally the case in market research. And if you haven't read The Lean Startup by Eric Ries and you want to build a new product or service, please make reading that book a priority. Lean startup techniques are all about reducing risk by developing a minimum viable product, also referred to as as an MVP. Although I just heard someone yesterday refer to it as an MLP, a minimum lovable product, which I like even more. But that's really all about testing and measuring user outcomes to ensure rollout success. And this build, measure, learn framework should be really innate to researchers. So I'm surprised that it's not used more frequently in the development of new research products. I want to just spend just a minute or two talking about companies that are doing it right. If you look around the research space, and it's really a mix of the familiar and the unrecognizable. Qualitative and semiotic continues to flourish, but so too do high-tech solutions from players like Facebook and Google. The companies you see here are innovating really like never before. companies like Kantar, who are making strategic investments in companies like Zappy Store. MarketCast just purchased Physiology earlier this year, which is a social media listing company, insights company. You've got companies like Voxpopme and InfoTools using AI and other technologies to really change not only how we collect data, but also how we report on it. Some of these firms capture insights without asking people a single question through neuroscience and social media. They link purchase and media behavior in real time. They predict behavior, and they engage executive teams with real-time data that's inclusive of secondary sources, and they deliver that data via interactive TED-style talks internally. But I think what's really truly different about these firms and what you can learn from them is that they have, for the most part, mastered what trade-offs are worth making, what should be pursued, and most importantly, what should be abandoned. So something to keep in mind as you're thinking about your innovation in 2018. So what does the future of insights look like? To me, it consists of three things. The first is dynamic. I think research is becoming more agile and programmatic in nature. We're moving toward a constant stream of information that comes in without anyone having to ask a question. There's more focus on passive and secondary data streams, predictive analytics, behavioral data. If you look at that Quarks Corporate Researcher report, you'd see that nearly 60% of clients plan to reduce their spend on face-to-face qualitative research, and 30 to 40% plan to cut primary quant work. More than 80% of corporate researchers actually plan to spend more on data mining, analytics, passive measurement, digital ad optimization, and customer experience. And again, these were market research services that literally weren't around 10 years ago in most cases. I think the future of insights is also humanized, and Annie Pettit has written extensively about the value of humanizing research. I think she's done some really amazing work talking about humanizing market research rather than talking to people like they're robots. And I think technology, for all of its benefits, has really further distanced us from the people we once interacted with on a face-to-face basis. The ways that we ask questions are antiquated, and most of us can't even stand to take the same surveys we designed, which I mentioned before when I talked about mobile survey design. In most cases, because they're just really, really long and boring, and it's something we really have to think about as an industry. And then lastly, interactive voices, images, video will help businesses understand people and trends, and AI will learn from that data and guide businesses on how to act. From a reporting perspective, like I mentioned, there's a greater focus on TED-style talks, and I think also really using video, and particularly video events, to show respondents in the moment. Those are the things that really, really engage clients. So I want to close with just sharing with you 4 daily habits that I use to ensure that you're future-proof. And a few of these are a little woo-woo. I recognize that, but they are things that I've adopted into my daily practice, not just in running my businesses, but now also in running my consultancy and really how I work with clients on a daily basis. So the first is, really just learn to follow your instincts. What are you curious about? What sounds like fun? Can you be good at it? In 1998, I was convinced that the industry was going to go online, and I really wanted to be a part of it. And at the time, I was working at Lieberman Research Worldwide in Los Angeles, and I was very bold. I was in my early 20s, and I asked to meet with the CEO to ask to be part of the team to take the company out of face-to-face data collection and online, and he told me no. And we still laugh about that conversation. But I ended up leaving less than a month later to join AC Nielsen, where I was really fortunate to drive the development of their first online data collection platform, and left 2 years later to co-found OTX, where, as I mentioned earlier, we developed the first online testing platform for the film industry, securely testing TV spots and trailers for movies. And if I hadn't followed my heart and busted out of my comfort zone, I wouldn't have had the career I did today. So following your instincts is really, really important, and paying attention to the things that you're really interested in. The second, and this is the woo-woo part of the presentation, is to get outside to get inside. And I say this because we as human beings are literally wired to be outside. The frontal lobe, the part of our brain that's hyper engaged in modern life, deactivates a little when you're outside. Alpha waves, which indicate a calm but alert state, grow stronger when you're outside. And when psychologists talk about flow, and there's been even books written about flow, which is kind of like your optimal work state, there's heavy alpha wave engagement in that state, which is when some of your best work happens. And if that isn't enough to convince you, for the women who are listening to this webinar today, women who sit for 6 or more hours a day have a 94% chance of a lower lifespan. Sitting is truly the new smoking, and I also feel like the more time I spend outside, the more creative I am. If I'm stuck on a business problem, getting outside really helps me. If I want to brainstorm on a new product. Now, I live in I live half the year in a tiny mountain town in Oregon, and the other half of the year in Athens, Greece, and I'm outside a lot, but I know it can be really challenging to get outside in big cities. So if you can't get outside, at least change your environment. You know, go for a walk or grab a desk in a co-working space or a coffee shop. Next is being a future scout. As researchers, I think we tend to be really insular. We spend a lot of time learning or reading about new research methods, but from the same traditional group of researchers. Rather than focusing on research content, I challenge you to spend more time learning outside the industry, because that's where you're going to get exposed to new ideas and new ways of doing things. And I'm going to mention that Ray Pointer has told me not to tell people to read books because no one reads anymore, but I just don't believe that. And maybe it's because I'm an avid reader, but I wanted to just share a few of my favorite books that really inspire me. Contagious by Jonah Berger, which is all about branding and the art of why things catch on, why products and services catch on, how to create contagious products. Richard Feynman, which is a physicist, and most people glaze over when I suggest reading a book by a physicist, but it's really an interesting read. It's all about creative thinking and how to think creatively about problems. And then if I can't read for some reason, if I'm driving in my car, I've got a long trip, I always listen to podcasts. Freakonomics, Radiolab, Hidden Brains are some of my favorites. I pretty much never listen to business podcasts. So anything that kind of gets you out of market research into your creative zone, I think is really helpful. And then lastly, you know, busting out of your comfort zone is really important. And I'm going to use the venture capital world as an example of this. The venture world is really filled with blinders and biases, which keep it focused on the same kinds of places and people and problems as a source for businesses to fund. You might be surprised to hear that in 2015, only 5% of capital went to female founders, and just 1% went to African Americans and Latinos. And between 2007 and 2012, graduates of just 6 universities, Stanford, Harvard, Berkeley, MIT, NYU, and the University of Pennsylvania, received 10% of all the world's startup funding. That's a very, very narrow window for funding. And I was browsing through some online magazines and saw this really funny article about VCs. A group of white men in Patagonia vests are confused for a VC fund and raised $500 million before lunch. I thought it was a funny article, but you know, it really rings home for me because I think we like to think that entrepreneurship is a game that anyone can win, but in truth, VCs fund products that solve problems they understand. And being largely white, male, and elite educated, they fund people of the same background. In 2012, the Kauffman Foundation actually analyzed over 100 VC funds and found that only 20 out of 100 produced returns higher than 3% annually. That's actually worse than if you just invested your money in the stock market. So why do you think that is? I think the takeaway for me here is that it's important to surround yourself with people who are different, different in age, income, race, sexual preference, gender, and nationality, and can offer really different perspectives. And it's one of the reasons I spent half the year living in Europe, and I'm also so proud to be an SMR Council member because of the global perspective it really offers me on this industry. So just want to close, leave you with a quote from the CEO of Patagonia. Patagonia is one of my favorite brands. And their CEO said, "In the end, the great companies will be the ones that have the vision to face facts square in the eye and take action, radical action." And I hope today I've inspired you to take some radical action of your own.